Today on the Athlete One podcast.
I think for us, again, we work so hard. We put in so many hours, so many at-bats, so many ground balls. Like, when you get to face one of those primetime guys, like, you should be jacked up. Like, this is what we won for. This is what we've practiced and put in all that time to be able to face a guy like this. I think a lot of it comes back to having a little bit of chip on your shoulder. Like, don't walk in there like you're defeated. You should walk in there thinking, man, I get 4, hopefully it's 5 at-bats a day against this kid. Like, I'm ready to roll.
Welcome to the Athlete One podcast. Veteran high school baseball coach Ken Carpenter takes you into life's classroom as experienced through sports. Go behind the scenes with athletes and coaches as they share great stories, life lessons, and ways to impact others.
Hello and welcome to episode 48 of the Athlete One podcast. I'm your host, Ken Carpenter. Joining me today is Kahn, the Lancaster High School baseball coach who in 10 years has instilled a belief system that has completely changed the expectations for his team. After 3 district titles, they're ready to take the next step toward a state championship. Before we get to the conversation with Kahn, please take the time to subscribe and leave a review. It helps us grow the show. As always, the Athlete One podcast is powered by the Netting Professionals. They're improving programs one facility at a time. They specialize in the design, fabrication, and installation of custom netting for baseball, softball, including backstops, batting cages, BP turtles, and screens, ball carts, and so much more. They also install digital graphic wall padding, windscreen, turf protectors, dugout benches, and cubbies. They're not limited to just baseball and softball. They also work with football, soccer, lacrosse, and golf courses. Contact them today at 844-620-2707 or info@nettingpros.com. Visit them online at www.nettingpros.com or check out Netting Pros on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn for all their latest products and projects. Now to my interview with Lancaster High School head baseball coach Kahn. Thanks for being on the show.
Ken, thank you. I really appreciate you having me.
All right. Well, you got your first round out of the way when it comes to the state tournament here in Ohio with a win over Westerville South, and your upcoming game is against Upper Arlington, which is always putting out a good team. Tournament time seems to be a lot tougher this time of the year. The wins seem to come a lot tougher. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. It always comes down to, some of those small plays throughout the game that can kind of, when you look back, either win or lose you the game. What we always try to do is, throughout our season and throughout our preseason, our practices is really kind of key in on some of those things. That way, we're not losing a game because of one of those small little things, whether that's backing up a base or not getting to where you're supposed to be on a bunt coverage or, whatever those things are. Those things are always magnified this time of year. Yes, definitely. And it's really great to see the weather changed a little bit here in the state of Ohio, and it warmed up a little bit. Absolutely.
And, that brings out a little bit bigger crowd, and the players seem to get a little more excited for this time of the year. And I guess what I wanted to talk about was 10 years ago, you took over at Lancaster, and I had a player that I've coached mentioned you and your team culture that you've put together down there. And when it comes to the culture, what were some of the changes you made when you took over at Lancaster?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we wanted to, kind of have our core set of values, and what were those values going to be. And we kind of went off, we're the Gales. So each one of those letters is going to stand for something. So we got the G is for grind, the A is for attitude, the L is for leadership, E being excellence, and then the S being selfless. And, we kind of have a presentation about what that looks like. And, as we've gone through the years, we've been able to have great examples of our players within our program that exemplify, those core values. And I think that helps put legs to, it's when we're talking about the pros or something like that, there's still kind of a disconnect between, our guys and the program. And yes, we can see it at the pro level, but when you can use somebody from the program that everybody knows and talk about those certain aspects, it creates so much more of a bond between, our core values and our guys. We talk a lot about selfless. It's the last one and it's the hardest. And we had a key situation in 2018 where, we had a senior who had started for 3 years and we had a super sophomore coming up, and they kind of play the same position. And eventually that sophomore would kind of beat him out for some of those at bats and playing time. And, here's the senior helping this kid each day at practice get better, even though, they play the same position. And I think that's something that's one of the many examples we've keyed on about how to be selfless and what that actually looks like, and has really helped us. And, in that year too, as it turned out, that senior would get back into the rotation, to the lineup, and end up making some huge plays for us down the stretch.
Well, you talk about the leadership part, and I've mentioned this on another podcast I've had, but teaching players, you might pick a captain, teaching players to be a leader. It's a lot tougher than it is when you're a 16, 17, 18-year-old player and you're trying to teach them to lead the team. And have you come across anything where they come back to you and they're like, well, coach, I don't know if the guys are really listening to me?
Yeah. We have a lot of those discussions where, I think that's where we as coaches come into play with, again, what type of culture do we want? And I think a lot of times, and myself included, we've had some discussions this year where, I kind of expect, some of our, maybe senior or junior leaders to kind of do things, but I haven't really explained or explained to them what I'm looking for and what we need. I think a lot of times we just kind of expect them to do it because, again, this is my 10th year, and, we've kind of had people just kind of do it without us having to say it. And I think a lot of times too, we kind of forget that we had a lot of those discussions with those old senior classes, that as these new senior classes come up, we need to explain, a lot of those same lessons to those guys, because it's the first time they're hearing it. And that's something we talk to with all of our guys too, is always, hey, let's try to leave our program in a better place, and kind of challenge each of the senior classes to try to do that.
Now, you just mentioned your coaches. You've talked with them. Do you have a staff that's been with you the whole time, or has there been some turnover? And when you do have if you do have the turnover, what is the type of coach that you're looking for to be an assistant?
We've had a few guys there, but we've had a little bit of turnover as well. The biggest thing I think that I'm finally starting to get into, which is pretty cool, is I'm having some former players come back and coach on staff. So They kind of already know the expectations. There's the biggest thing I think that you can look for is just loyalty and loyalty to the program, loyalty to our kids, and loyalty to obviously to each other. And it's pretty cool to be able to have some of those former players come back in coaching roles. And, hopefully over the next few years, I'll get a couple more.
Yeah, it's great when you have the players that are able to give back to the team that they once played on. Now, let me ask you about you've only been there 10 years, but have you started to develop anything with the younger groups, the middle school and even younger in the Lancaster community?
Yeah. So when I first got there, we didn't have a junior high program. So we finally started, we have a junior high program now, and we were able to get it school sponsored for a while there. It was club, and, we ran into different transportation issues. And so we finally got that within our program now. And we actually just built 2 new junior highs a couple years ago. So we have a field at each one of those. And then we're currently in the process of building a new high school field right now. We'll have 2 new high school fields. So, we're hoping to be able to expand upon that and get down to the youth level as well. I have a 7 and a 5-year-old that are coming up, so it'll be kind of prime time for them as well. So, hopefully our field's supposed to be done this September. It's supposed to be turfed, and hopefully be able to have our own field and be able to kind of set some of those things up for our youth level now that we have the junior highs rolling.
Well, have you added added or made any adjustments to the standards that you've set when you first came in 10 years ago?
It's kind of funny you asked that. So I have a PowerPoint that we go through each year, and it kind of expands upon each one of those core values. And I think if anything, I've strengthened how we've used those, strengthened how we've taught those. And we also, the last few years, we've had a motto, kind of for each year, in addition to our core values, kind of something to zone in on one thing. And each one of those mottos has come from that PowerPoint, somewhere embedded in there, kind of discovering it on accident, really. So I think the core values have stayed the same, but now we're able to tell some better stories about each one of those.
Now, you've established what I would say is a winning tradition there at Lancaster. You've kind of changed the whole mindset there. Was it harder building the program to where you want it to be, or is it more difficult trying to stay on top, winning OCC championships and trying to get to that state Final Four?
That's a great question. It was definitely, it's definitely hard to get there. To win the first, it feels like it's so hard to scrape and claw to even get into a district, and then let alone to try to win 2 games to get there. I think that without those early years where we kind of struggle a little bit, though, I don't think we'd be able to kind of build something that we have that we've built. I heard a quote that if to build it to last, it's not going to be built fast. And I think that, some of those early years definitely had some frustrations and learned a whole heck of a lot along the way. But then obviously coming into this year too, kind of, 3 straight, districts, 3 OCCs. One of our mottos was just to love and embrace expectations. A lot of times I think that, you can kind of always think about expectations, and it can kind of be some big daunting thing where, you don't want to talk about it or you get scared about it. But, we say, hey, just embrace it. Like, understand that we have accomplished these things, and people are going to say stuff. And at the end of the day, though, it doesn't matter whatever whatever expectations are placed on you. We already expect to win. We already expect to have this kind of attitude that when we get into the box, we're going to hit a barrel. When we go to the mound, we're going to get an out. When we go to the field, we're going to make a play. So all those expectations, like, we already kind of have those. So just embrace it.
What would it mean to the Lancaster community if you get to the ultimate goal of playing for a state title?
It mean a lot. So Lancaster's never won a state title. So we've talked about that we just haven't won a state title yet. Like, it's going to happen at some point. Obviously would love for it to be sooner than later. But we have a first pitch dinner every year, kind of a kickoff for the season. And the last few years we've had Coach Dick England, who just turned 90 a couple months ago. And so he spoke at it, and one of the things that he said that we had kind of talked about, in the fall season, is, man, how cool would it be for us to be able to make it to the state tournament for Dick and kind of give that as his 90th birthday present. And then when Coach England gave that keynote, speech at our first pitch dinner, he had talked about, man, there'd be no greater birthday present than, to be able to watch the Gales in a state championship. So it would definitely mean a lot. It would mean a lot for somebody like Coach England to be able to see that. And it would mean a lot for me and for our staff and for our players to be able to deliver that to him.
Well, what a lot of people don't realize about being a high school coach is the time that's put in away from family, and the time that you put with other people's kids. And basically what I'm trying to get at, I guess, is, you start up in the fall probably with some sort of a workout, and then it leads into the winter. And then you finally get to the spring where you actually get to play the games. But the part that people don't realize is all the paperwork, the fundraising, because it's a sport that it's in the spring, and, it's not a paid sport. So you're trying to raise a ton of money. And if you don't have a turf field, you're putting a lot of the physical work into that field too. And talk a little bit about what you do throughout the year to make your team the team it is today.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times too, people kind of see the end result, the last 2 weeks of a season, and that's not even the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that people don't see. And for us, we kind of have our fall season where we, have our open fields, and we have our guys lift, and that kind of goes into our winter season. We call it our 40 for 40, where it's about 40 workouts all throughout the off season. And, we have some individual work with that as well, and in very limited spaces. We try to get some infield work in our weight room, which is not very big at all, and it's pretty difficult. But that's another thing that we tell our guys is there's a lot of things that we don't have. Let's just focus on what we do have and try to make the best of it. And I think that, something early in my career, I kind of would get hung up on, well, we don't have this facility and we can't go here. So, we're just not going to get work in, which made no sense. And now it's more about finding solutions to areas that we do have and what we can get done, and also just trying to be creative in those areas. So we do a lot of that. And then it kind of goes into preseason. And then, again, these guys have, by the time our season starts, a lot of them have spent so much time together, that they're going to fight for each other. And that's exactly what we want. And, we work too hard and spend too much time to not play, each pitch like it's our last. And that's really kind of the message that we want to send across too is, hey, you never know. You never know when the last one's going to be. And so let's go out there and just try to win as many pitches as possible. And, let's compete to the hardest to our ability.
Well, let me ask you this. You see a ton of stuff on Twitter and, in the media and everything, social media, where parents are, how do I want to say this? I guess they are taking it a little bit too far with the umpires, sometimes with coaches. And how do you address that as a high school coach? Do you have like a parent meeting to say, we're there to support our team and not take it to the extreme, I guess?
Yeah. So each year, we have our first pitch dinner and we talk about some of those things. And, but I think probably the best thing is we have a first year player and parent meeting where it's a little more intimate in a classroom setting. And, we just kind of go through our expectations too. And I think that kind of helps, doesn't solve all those problems, but I think it helps, solve some of them and kind of get ahead of the curve a little bit. And, we just try to say, these are our expectations, and, this is kind of what we expect from our players and obviously expect from parents as well. And I think the other thing about playing at Beavers Field is we're kind of away from all that. So I don't really hear too many parents, getting on umps or whatnot and or us. So, there's some definite benefits with that as well.
Well, you said you play at Beavers Field, and are you talking with the new place? Is it going to be an on-campus field
Yeah, it'll be on campus. So it'll actually sit where our old junior high used to sit, and it'll be right down by the football field. So, once you go down our lane there, you'll have, two brand new baseball fields that'll kind of go into our football field, which is all turf, and then get their tennis courts. And then our new high school is going to sit where our current baseball field is now. So it's going to be a beautiful campus when it's all done.
Well, tell me about a time in your career, either as a coach or a player, where you had to deal with adversity, and how did you handle that and how did you overcome it, I guess?
Well, I think probably the biggest example of adversity would be, as a player, I played for Bluffton University and Coach Grandy. And so in 2007, we had our bus accident where, we were going down for our spring trip, end up mistaking an off ramp and having a pretty bad accident and end up, losing some teammates. And so, that was, there's no kind of book or guidelines or manual about how to deal with it. So that was trying to figure it out on the fly. And one of our assistant coaches, Todd Miller, who was a D1 head coach, or hopefully soon to be D1 head coach, but he's a D1 assistant at Tennessee Tech. To be in his position too, as a 23, 24-year-old coach, coaching all of us and going through that, continually impressed by what he was able to do. And With that, it really was focus on one day at a time. You can't get too far, ahead of yourself, and one day at a time, and control what you can control. And repeatedly having to tell yourself that is, eventually you realize, hey, there's a lot of things outside of my control. And if you catch yourself always worrying about those things, it's not going to do you any good. And I think that, having to learn that as a 19-year-old, and, you're kind of at that age where you think you're invincible anyway, and nothing's ever going to go wrong. And, the things that up until that point that went wrong were, you forgot your pants one day, or you misplaced your belt. And, those things were kind of the biggest adversity that you faced up until, some of those other major life things that happened. So, I think, being able to, again, just be where your feet are, and my guys probably get sick of hearing that, but, really just kind of focus in on the present moment, and again, play each game like it's your last, because, you definitely don't know, when the last one's going to be.
Right. Now, I've had James Grandy, the head coach at Bluffton University. I've had him on the podcast, and just a very good person.
Great dude.
Not so much as a coach, not talking about being a coach, just a great person. And on top of that, he does a great job as a coach. And, from what I understand from him is he was injured pretty bad, and the assistant coach and the team pretty much had to come together to continue with the season, I guess.
Yeah, just thinking back to some of those conversations and whatnot, I try to view it now from a coach standpoint, and I can't imagine what was going through Coach Miller's head trying to make some of those decisions. But I also feel for Coach Grandy, because he couldn't be there because he was injured so bad, and that. So I'm sure that weighed on him a ton to not be able to be inside the circle and be there with us as much as I know he probably wanted to be.
Well, since we're on the topic of Bluffton, talk about you as a player. What has that done for you now that you're a coach?
Tremendous. My experience was awesome. I kind of came in as a shortstop and got moved over to third base, and that was I only played third base a little bit. That ball gets on you pretty quick over there, so you kind of have to make some adjustments with positioning and posture. And then I ended up moving over to second base my junior and senior year as well. So it's a whole different turn that you got to learn. And didn't quite understand it when I'm playing, about bouncing around so much and trying to learn positions, and now it's really helped me to be able to understand all the different things that players go through at those positions, the different plays that they're going to have to make, the different footwork that they're going to have. And I think that's really helped me become a good coach at with our infielders, just because I've had to do each one of those positions. So I think that helps me communicate better, because I can understand and understand what they're going through with each position.
Now, did that open your eyes as far as when you look at a player, you say, he comes up to you and he's been the shortstop his whole life, and then you're like, well, I think you might be better at third base for us, and as that can give you a different perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And as a player, you're always, you don't really think about those things. And then as you get older and you start to view things through a coach's lens, it's always, you're trying to put that player's skill set in the best position. And sometimes a player doesn't always see it, but you as a coach, you can see it. And I think that also goes back to what we've been able to do, is be able to have some of those conversations with our guys and just explain it, like, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is what you do well. And, these are the positional demands. And I think it works very well with your skill set. And a lot of times after those conversations, it's all good.
Well, I've heard that, you talk about the saying of you're only good as your weakest player on your team. How do you handle the player that, he's been in the program for 4 years, but maybe he's just not good enough to get the playing time that he might expect? How do you handle that type of player with your program?
So we try to be very clear with our expectations at the beginning of the year, kind of where we see them, and try to have multiple conversations with that player, just to always make sure that they're on the same page and we're on the same page, and, kind of keep those lines of communication open. We actually had a player a few years ago who was a really good middle infielder. If he was on our team this year, he'd be one of our starters. But he was also behind, a couple of years ago, he was behind two really good players. So he didn't get to play very much. And then he started his senior night, and he ended up turning 2 double plays. And, our guys went nuts for him because, we worked so much on that. And he's probably turned, in his career, probably turned 1,000 double plays, but, never really got the chance that the starter gets until senior night. And then senior night, as it happens, he gets, 2 ground balls. I think he turned 1 and finished 1. So it was pretty cool from that aspect. And it kind of goes back to us too, always talking about, it's about the team. And as much as, we want to see individual success and we will celebrate individual successes, it's still ultimately about the team.
Now, what people don't realize about Central Ohio baseball, that if they're not from Central Ohio, is the talent level that we have here in Central Ohio is off the charts.
Very good, yes.
And I mean, we have players every year going to the SEC and all over the country for that point, for that matter, I guess. But what do you tell your team when you're going up against a guy that's a potential D1 college player and you're trying to get them prepared for that game? And now it's the time of the year where you're going to see some really good pitches.
Absolutely.
So how do you handle that with your guys?
I think for us, again, we work so hard. We put in so many hours, so many at-bats, so many ground balls. Like, when you get to face one of those primetime guys, like, you should be jacked up. Like, this is what we won for. This is what we've practiced and put in all that time to be able to face a guy like this. And I think a lot of it comes back to having a little bit of chip on your shoulder. Like, don't walk in there like you're defeated. You should walk in there thinking, man, I get 4, hopefully it's 5 at-bats today against this kid. Like, I'm ready to roll. And I think, that's our mindset too, each game. We want to walk into the plate like we own it. We want to walk into the box like it's our box. We tell told our guys a lot this year that when you walk into the box, that's your box, and everybody that's here watching the game, they're watching you. So it's time to put on a show. And I think that's the type of mindset that you got to have. And I think also, hey, it's a pretty good pitcher. So if he gets you once, hey, he got lucky. He's not going to get it again. And you're going to see him here in a little bit. And, you need to tell him that, hey, that was a fluke on that first at-bat. I mean business this at-bat. And, I think it's kind of having that short memory that, hey, you might be 0 for 4 Ks against that dude, but you better hope that you get a 5th at-bat because, it's showtime on this 5th at-bat.
So last year, you guys where did you guys finish up in the state tournament?
We lost in the regional semis to New Albany.
And they eventually went on to win the state title in the big school division here in Ohio. What this season, it's one and done, basically, survive and advance. What do you think your expectations are going forward from here?
Expectation is always to make it to the state tournament, and that's what we really want. But, we also know that we're not looking too far ahead either. And so we have Upper Arlington on Tuesday, and they're a really good team, really good program. We know that, hey, we need to play our A game, in order to advance. So we're really kind of just focused on them. I know it's cliche or whatnot, but, again, just be where our feet are. The only one that matters is the next one. And then once we advance from that one, we can focus on the next one and the next one and the next one.
Well, great, Corey. I want to thank you again for taking the time to be on the Athlete One podcast. And I really enjoy the things you're doing as a coach. And
thank you.
When I live up in Dublin, so I'm hearing about you from players up this way. So obviously
that's pretty cool to hear. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. You're doing a lot of things the right way. And, I really wish you guys the best of luck. And thanks again for taking the time to be on the Athlete One podcast.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you having me on, Ken. I really do appreciate it. So thank you.
Don't forget to follow the Athlete One podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Athlete One Podcast. Also, visit our website at www.athleteone.net. This episode of the Athlete One podcast is powered by the Netting Professionals. Contact them today at 844-620-2707 or info@nettingpros.net. Visit them online at www.nettingpros.com or check out Netting Pros on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn for all their latest products and projects. Thanks for joining.